is a professor for me that I studied for many years. So for me, it's like a dream that became a reality. And the topic that we will introduce is a multiscale planning concept for sustainable metropolitan development, and is the topic correlated the main topics that do during his I'm sorry, I'm really emotionate, so I'm sorry, during his career. So, Professor Pierre Frankhauser is Professor Emeritus, and it's really difficult to summarize all CV in a few words. But I want only to underline that his main topic is correlated with the spatial organization of public and transport networks, and he works many years during all career in relation to fractal approach. He has different elements to underline, but as underline, it's really difficult to analyze all best prizes that he won, all different projects that was really competitive and that he won. But I want also to underline that he has two PhD, one in theoretical physics and another in human geography. So his main topic correlated with these two PhD students are correlated with self-organizing processes. He did many periods as a visiting professor in Louvain-la-Neuve, in Groningen, in Vienna, and he also succeeded to develop different software. And he worked at ThéMA laboratory at the University of Besançon. So I can give the floor to you, and I'm sorry if I'm so emotionate, but it's like my dream that became reality. So I'm sorry for that. Okay. And this is for the organization. Okay. Thank you.
This is your presentation. Keynote. This one. Yes. Great.
Well, thank you very much for having invited me to this colloquium. It is a great pleasure for me to explain you the researches we do since a certain time at University of Besançon in cooperation with also a laboratory in the Paris region, LVMT. So we have different persons which contributed to this project. Olivier Bonner in Paris region, and Claudia Yarmou now in Norway, in Oslo, and Xavier Lehmann also in Paris region. Well, what I want to present is a system which aims to develop concepts which are oriented where sustainable development. I will start by explaining the urban development dilemma, which we have actually in all over the world. Then I will speak of some planning concepts already existing. And then I will go to the fractality, so the use of fractal geometry for conceiving models which are capable to develop sustainable development programs. Well, if you look at cities, usually you have the impression that the classic, let's say the classic model of cities are compact as medieval cities. And the reference are, of course, usual Euclidean geometric references. But even if you look in ancient times, you see that, for example, Palma Nova was not constructed as the ideal plan says, but you have first constructions along the roads, the main streets, which go outside the city. This, of course, has been reinforced by since the motorization has been introduced, but already before, since the Industrial Revolution, you had a growth of cities, which was very important, and this growth was not limited by some walls as in medieval cities. So you have a rather complex situation. You have a multi-scale organization of these patterns, and they are often perceived as amorphous and are indeed hard to control. The urban growth process is rather complex, as we will see it immediately. Of course, what comes into play is the residential choice behavior. Residential choice behavior, which is nowadays less restricted because you have cars, you can go and rural areas. And if you look what people want to have, you see here an inquiry in France, you see that only 1% wants to live in big ensembles, in big buildings. Most of people like to have an individual house. As I say always, it's like a castle with a big park around. And well, 20% accept some situations like that. But you see that the central city, at least in France, is not something what people like. So this is a rather complex situation. Moreover, people nowadays live not only in their town, but they are going outside. They go to other cities. They go. They have activities outside in the surrounding cities. So this, of course, generates also traffic. So you have on the one side the residential choice criteria, living in the countryside, the lot rent is not as important as in the city. You have individual housing and also recent events as COVID, but also the teleworking is not allows to be outside of the city and not to be inside or close to the place you are working. You have also the public policy, which in some sense improved the street network, created malls in the peripheral areas, also made programs for housing development. So it is not only the people, but also the public policy which did favor this evolution. Well, the disadvantages are no generation of car traffic, increase of traveling distances, lack of pedestrian and bike networks, lack of service offer, and of course also the vulnerability of the nature due to the fragmentation of natural space. What is behind that? Of course, you have a very complex situation for the evolution of cities. You have the individuals, the households, but you have also social groups, pressure groups. So on different scales, you are actors, and this is one where the architecture which constructs houses, but you have the urbanism on the urban scale, and you have the interaction on the metropolitan scale between different cities. And this, of course, is a very complex situation. Spatial structure, finally, is the result of the interaction of different cities or of urbanism, which is also driven by the interactions of these different actors. So you have a macro-scale structure which emerges by a self-organization process, which is the interactions between the different components, social components of the city. Of course, afterwards you have different problems. You have the economic, you have the social demand, you have the environment. These are very important aspects of sustainable development. But of course, you have conflictual situations between these three elements. Well, planning concepts aim to conciliate the different aspects, the different items. How can you do it? As we saw, the compact and dense development is in opposition with the social demand, which claims calm and green living environments. Densifying of centers favors urban sprawl because it favors car use in this sense that people go outside for having green areas. So it is a rather difficult situation. So you cannot just densify to have less car use. There's another point which becomes more and more important, densifying generous heat islands. And this, of course, in the climate change situation, a big problem. So you have social aspects, you have environmental aspects which come into play. Finally, people, what want people? People want to have a green environment, to have the amenities they would have, which are important for them. For example, schools, doctor, but also green areas, also some shops for daily needs. And they accept more distances for walking, for other activities, for going to the train station and so on.
Yeah. Can I just adjust the sharing settings?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, so indeed there exist different. Yes. Well, there exist different planning concepts which are already orientated toward penetration of built-up space, of leisure areas and climate corridors in the built-up space. A very ancient plan was that of Berlin in 1910, which already proposes green lanes entering in the central city. Copenhagen is very known. The northern countries have this concept in different, also at Helsinki, for example, or at Hamburg. Also in Berlin, well, you have these green zones which are entering in the city and which are also defined as climate corridors, ventilation of cities. On a local scale, other people, other architects proposed also a penetration of green areas to the housing sector, to the housing scale. You have also reflections, for example, for Paris, to have some secondary centers which have a certain autonomy, so that people need not to go in the central city all the days, that you have employments and amenities outside of the central city. So you are going in direction of a multi-scale situation of a polycentrism. But indeed, these propositions remain rather uniscale, and we will now see that fractality goes beyond. So we are using a multi-scale approach, and I will just make some remarks on fractality. Well, fractals can be constructed by an iteration process, as you see here, and they are, and the particularity is that in the course of time, of iteration, the surface vanishes and the border length tends to infinity, at least at this type of fractals, which are the Sierpinski carpets. Well, we introduced, or mathematicians have introduced the fractal dimension, which allows to have a measure, a constant measure across the scales for these curious objects. And fractal dimensions describe the local concentration, but across scales. So you have clusters at each scale. And you have also, what is very typical, you have lacunes at each scale. And for example, on the here and above, you see, for example, already a situation which can be interesting for an urban city, a metropolitan area. We have a strict distribution law of the mass, which is the hyperbolic law. And you see this is not the same as density. For example, these two structures have the same density, but at left you have a fractal situation with a fractal dimension of 1.89. And the other side you have a homogeneous classical situation with dimension 2. Well, you can also construct fractals which are more or less regular and which are more interesting in our context. Well, you see that you have the fractal dimension, which finally describes what occurs when you are going from one scale to another one. And density, classical densities, are related to one scale, and this is often a rather big problem in geography, for example, when aggregating data. Well, so we will now look, well, I just mentioned multifractal logic, which have different scaling factors and which is very complex in mathematical description, but I will not go into details because it is not very interesting. What is interesting that you have the same size of different types. You see here this below you have a little reproduction of what is in the center, but the central part on the above is just the same size as the periphery of the central cluster. This is a particularity which we will see afterwards, which is interesting. A fractal is based on a scaling law, non-uniform distribution of mass, neither dense nor diluted, and the mass distribution follows a precise law, the Pareto distribution, a hyperbolic distribution. You have a strong hierarchical account, which is interesting for us, and we have irregular structures correspond eventually to a fractal order principle if you have empirical data. Well, Nicolis said it is a very simple model for complexity. We'll now go on with cities. You see here an illustration by a very simple model that indeed the multiscale aspect of cities can be described more or less by fractal geometry, as you have a model on the right. And indeed you have fractal situations where it is known that there are fractal situations in physics. And the question was if this is true for the cities. Well, I will not speak about this, the analysis of cities, but it turned out that indeed fractals allow rather well to describe the spatial organization of metropolitan areas. This will not say that there are strict mathematical fractals. There are some levels where you have changement of the scaling behavior, but at least it is a very good method for describing this situation. You can, of course, we can ask the questions if this is not a harmful consequence of open sprawl, but we should be aware that there are different aspects to take into account. Here you have the suburb railway access and the urbanization of Berlin again. You see that Berlin evolved along some public transportation access, and this is typical for the first period of urbanization. What is going on since you have the motorization? You see it here for the Strasbourg case. More and more, the interstitial, the lacunes which existed before between these axes are polluted by construction, so they have more and more a more homogeneous situation on the metropolitan scale. So a more fractal situation allows to concentrate activities along some axes and to avoid very diffuse urbanization. Moreover, what is interesting that fractals allow to combine different types of soil occupation. In our context, green areas, built-up areas, and networks. Here you have a mathematical example where you see that they combine the colors, the three colors. You have at each point of the separation, you have three colors and not two as usual. It is usually the case if you have such a situation. So you can well articulate different types of land use. So you can indeed model metropolitan areas. You can introduce a hierarchical system, and you can across scales articulate open space and urbanized areas. What allows to have ventilation corridors and also to concentrate urbanization along some axes which should be public transportation axes. Here you have we made a simulation where we gave a certain amount of kilometers per week, and we compared a compact structure, as you see at the right, and on the left a fractal structure on different iterations. And we showed that if you have a fractal structure, you have, of course, a certain loss of centrality because you are diluting the constructed area. But the loss of centrality is less than the gain to the access to open areas, to green areas. So this is in some sense optimization. You have certainly a loss. But if you introduce secondary centers, as here on the left side, you see you have the main center in this wedge is in the center, the black square, and you have some grayscale scales. You have some gray subcenters, which also have already some amenities, so people are not obliged to go to the city center to have bread, for example. So this shows that the fractal arrangement could indeed be interesting in this sense. We use these approaches for conceiving our model, the fractal concept, which respect the hierarchy of needs of people. We come back again by a hierarchical organization of amenities, by ensuring a good accessibility to these amenities according to different hierarchical levels, what reduces car use and trip lengths. It allows also to preserve biodiversity and avoid heat islands by a linked hierarchical system of green areas, avoiding the fragmentation and that of urbanized areas. It ensures also good accessibility to different types of leisure areas, and the green corridors across scales ensure also a cooling effect for the urbanized areas. You can also introduce suburban agriculture in these green lanes. So we have, in some sense, three main topics: the land use model, the housing model, and the satisfaction model. These three approaches are integrated in the fractal model. First, we look at the land use model, which is based in some sense on the crystalline scheme that will say a hierarchical situation of the different amenities, because universities, you will not construct them in villages, but in the village area, the village scale, you need, for example, to have a baker shop. So you have a hierarchy of needs, and we use this, but in the fractal sense, you can introduce some green lanes, which is here at the right side. So we have a different situation, and moreover, we take also in account that secondary of third order centers are smaller if you are more away from the big center, which is usually the case. So we have a hierarchical center with a big area, influence area of the central city, and we have on the second order we have some subcenters, and finally on the third order sub-subcenters, which ensure the daily needs. So this situation is, as you have seen, closely linked to a public transportation network, which is here symbolized. And you have a radio concentric concept, which includes all these topics. You have seen that they are. You see that they are highly articulated. You see here that you have a different types also of green areas. Here is forest, fields, and so on. But we will further on modify this model. For example, we'll admit, for example, that also you have villages in the forest areas. So we will not empty all the existing situations, and even we will admit that close to the center, in these close areas, you can perhaps have a little development, a small development. Here you will avoid development if possible. Well, we know we use this model, and we distinguish the construction areas, which are here the gray areas, and the white areas, which are the prevented areas, the protected areas, these areas will not be urbanized or slightly be urbanized, but the urbanization is concentrated in the gray areas. You see that by the fractal construction, you have more and more green areas, more or less. If you go on with iteration, the concentration becomes more and more important, and you have more and more second order and third order green areas close to the urbanized areas. We introduced a coding system, which is a function of the different centers. So you have 1, and the secondary centers are the zeros. And afterwards, you go by 11, which is a cell center. You have the secondary center. And here we have the periphery of the main center, 10. And you have 0, 0, which is the periphery of the 0, 1. You see that the 10 and the 0, 1 have the same size, but they have different functions. So we distinguish them, even if this is not the case in the fractal construction. Here you see the third order situation. By the coding system, you have a hierarchical iteration, and we obtain again a Pareto distribution, which is not the case for the multifractals, which have usually a binomial distribution because they have the same situation for the 110, the 101, and the 011. Well, we distinguish them according to their function. We introduce ourselves our housing model because we concentrate more dwellings in the main centers and in the second centers more than in the very small peripheries. So we have in some sense a gradient, but it is not really a gradient because you have a nested logic in this model. So we enlarge the basic model in two optics, in two items. You have this, the urbanized areas, and the yellow are the rural areas, the non-constructed areas, but we have, of course, population. So contrary to the fractal model, we have also population, but a low amount of population in these yellow areas. So you distinguish these areas as you see in the formula. We are going on the second step. We have the same logic. And then we introduce a population concentration model, which distinguishes the gray for the dark areas by a concentration in the main centers. And this logic is also continued in the second step. So you have concentrations and deconcentrations. This is the model which is a basic model for the simulator. Well, we can go on third step and so on. You see that, for example, if you have the main axis of our model, so you see that, for example, the population could be more important close to the main center, and in the periphery you have also here a center, but and here too, but these are centers which are not very developed, but you can also, by adjusting the parameters, you can make simulations. You have to concentrate more population in the secondary centers, and so on. So you can because you have these parameters are different, can be chosen different for each iteration step. This also distinguishes the model from the pure fractal models, where such factors should be constant. We allow that you can, at each step, concentrate or deconcentrate the population in the next step. So you have, of course, a mix of these factors, which make a rather subtle possibility to concentrate and deconcentrate population in the different centers. Third phase is the satisfaction model. We started from the theory of needs by Max Neff, where you have the subsistence, the understanding, the illness, and so on. You have a list of needs of people, of population, and for each need you have some satisfier which satisfy the need. These satisfiers and also their real situation, their real localizations could, of course, be very different. For example, food in China is different from Europe, but of course you can adapt the model by using China's data. So the model is very general. You have the needs, the satisfier, and the services which allows, and jobs are required to satisfy these needs to have the satisfiers. You can also, for example, calculate the profitability areas of each existing shop. This is not done for the moment, but we have the data for doing that. And the needs, of course, we are ranking then according to the necessity. Well, a baker shop is usual, it's important check each day, but of course, a hospital, we hope no. So the doctor, of course, is very important to have it close to your residence. So we consider the accessibility to these different types of amenities. We introduce for each level, here's the first level, the most local level, formalization, which is based on a fuzzy logic formalization, where you have yes, there is a problem with I have a problem with my presentation. There's one slide is not here, but it doesn't matter. Well, we have indeed in our formalization the idea that you have the percentage of people which are using a certain type of amenity. This is the M from A. A is the amenity. Then you have another factor, the distance factor, and this distance factor is based on data, on what we know. You have a constant evaluation for a certain distance, for example, 300 meters for going to the baker shop, and then it drops down about 500 meters, and then it is not interesting. So the evaluation of the satisfaction of these elementary amenities will be combined by these two factors. The factor which is the importance for population, if you're only 2% who use this amenity, is less important than you have 90% which use this amenity. So these two types of factors are combined, and this is done for the shopping amenities, the urban amenities, but also for the access to rural amenities that we see to all green areas. We have also a hierarchy of green areas, as we have it for the urban amenities. You have, for example, little parks, which playgrounds for people, for children. This is a very close amenity and green amenity. A big forest is a higher ranked amenity. You need not to go to the forest each day. So you have a ranking of the needs, as well as for the shopping needs, also to the leisure needs. So these two aspects are combined. These are combined. Also, the third type of amenity are the stations. You have also evaluation of the accessibility to transportation networks, and this is done in the same sense. And you combine these three informations to have evaluation of the first level, third level, second level, and so on, of these for exceeding to these amenities. This evaluation is made for each dwelling. For each dwelling, and this takes the time to calculate, of course. For each dwelling of the city, it is what is the satisfaction level of this dwelling. Afterwards, we will combine these informations for the simulation areas, for the fractal areas, for the urban areas. But we have the evaluation for each dwelling. We can combine this, and we can also afterwards we combine all the different levels, and we have afterwards also the frequency of attendance for the different levels. If you, for example, the importance to go to the forest is less, higher rank level is less important than the daily level. So you have here weighting factors, additional weighting factor. Well, you have here the list of the different amenities. You have the needs, and you have here the empirical data about the frequentation of this, for example, psychologue 6%, and so on. You see, you have here the frequency, which is one of the factors, the M of A, which I showed. So we have for each dwelling LIG, localized LIG, we have all the information about the satisfaction. And you can also afterwards for each fractal zone aggregate these informations by looking what are the dwellings lying in this zone. We have also global evaluation, which is a synthesis. Well, and now we developed a computer program, which is now actually developed as a GIS, as a plugin for the GIS for QGIS, which transformed the existing Java simulator. We are doing that for a real decision support system. So we used the first Java version, which was reprogrammed in Python, and which should also be used for a 3D simulator, which is not yet done. Finally, we simplified the situation, and we developed a plugin which is also useful for research and for research and development, but also for planning authorities. You can modify all the parameters, but you need not to do it. There are predefined values for the parameters, which are calibrated by the real data which were explored. The real data which were conceived by Xavier Lehmann based on 200 master plans, French master plans. Well, so we should, of course, first delimit the area, the study area. We use the external data of the shops and services, and also population. We have our satisfaction model. We create the intermediate database, which is the database of the dwellings, which for calculating them, it takes several hours. But once this database is calculated, you can use it afterwards for other scenarios. You can reuse, of course, this intermediate database. Then you can define your spatial scenario and the dwelling distribution, and you obtain afterwards, if you recalculate the satisfaction by using the data, you have the satisfaction for each zone, and you can also afterwards, for example, change the population, the concentration, deconcentration, and you can see what this is modifying. You can also, of course, change the scenario. You can inject some amenities and afterwards look if this, of course, will have a positive effect on the satisfaction level. Well, this is the procedure. You have the study area, you have the number of subsenders, the position of the subsenders and senders and subsenders, and you have the amenities. Well, I will just finish by showing some examples. The first version was used for Vienna. This was a PhD thesis of Claudia Yamou. We used it for Besançon, for Lyon, for Paris Est Ensemble. I will show this example. And with the new version, we will make tests on Besançon. We will make it work with Chiara on the Sardinia situation, and we have also the project to go on with Alger and also other French cities. I will just show the example of the Paris region. Here you started on the real scale of the big Paris area. We defined some subzones, which we localized, of course, by respecting the existing situation. You are not obliged to have the theoretical model. You can define your secondary orders. You can put your secondary order on the secondary centers which already exist. So, and you can start by the Metropolitan scale. You make 2 or 3 iterations, as we did it here, and then you can stop here and make detailed planning for selected zones. So they have a coherence on the whole Metropolitan area, but they are not obliged to explore for each village the position of each house. So you can make a zoom. For example, this is the general situation you saw. we have afterwards extracted the Paris center, and it is concentrated really only on the orange part, which is the ensemble area, which is a very, 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 very dense area. It is a catastrophe. But this is what's interesting to look what you can propose for such a very difficult zone. Moreover, it's a zone which has some problems, as you see recently in France. It is a very difficult social zone. Well, so we constructed the iteration for this East Paris situation. Here you have the last iteration step. And you see here, for example, our proposition for the green zones. Of course, we used existing green zones, but we said you should de-densify some zones in order to have a coherent system of connected green areas. So you can indeed, this is an illustration of this green corridor which we suggested. There are, of course, green areas. So we started where there are green areas, but you have some situations where you have no green areas, and there it would be good to destroy perhaps some buildings and to have more green in this section. We tested also different population scenarios by using simulation data from the French Statistical Institute. And for the situation which exists, we saw that, for example, in some areas we had really a surplus of population of housing units, and this could be reduced. And we calculated some propositions, and you can also, in other cases, densify. So you have some propositions to the different zones, which we considered here more in detail. We make a simulation for 206.50, as I said before. Also there, we see we have the density of dwellings per hectare is very, very important in all these zones. It is a very dense zone. Then we evaluated the satisfaction level. So you have indeed the service. What is interesting that usually the fourth order, that will say the daily needs, are not very good equipped. You have less satisfaction than the more aggregated needs. But this is often in these town sections the case, that there are not very much shops for the daily needs. The leisure areas are also very, very low in their evaluation, so they have not really close green areas which are used each day. So you have a rather good situation for the service of lesser importance, but lower satisfaction for the daily amenities. The very low satisfaction of the green space, excepted for the long distance areas where you have the Vincennes forest. There's 250 situations is slightly better overall due to the creation of an additional green spaces, because they have already some green spaces which they want to create. You see it here in red. Well, I will just finish by the Sardinia project, which has not been done. No? You have the idea that Sardinia is like a big Paris, it's a region, so you can work on this region level, and then you can make a zoom on different towns, on different cities, for example, of Cagliari, as you see here. And Sardinia is, well, we have 1.56 million inhabitants. Cagliari is a mean-sized city, but with a high density. So you see here the representation on the decision support system. You see here the amenities, the leisure activities, the train lines, which are in red. Here is one train line here. The public transportation stops. And now, if you go on, you have the possibility to choose between a circle, a hexagon, or a square. We chose here, we have chosen this a hexagon. This is the area which is here analyzed. Here the zone in the center, the central zone, and the peripheric zones which are defined. Here is an example, just really an example for illustration. It is not a real work. So afterwards, of course, you can place the hexagons otherwise, because we will not build in the seaside, of course. You see it here. You see here again the generator, the second step, the center, and the 4 subcenters, and here the adjusted situation, which respects what is very important. They respect the zone, and you cannot intersect zones. Fractal geometry don't allow that you intersect. This would completely it is nonsense, because you have a sort of connected area which you want to urbanize or not urbanize. Well, this is an example. We can go on by the next steps, and we can also adjust again. We have here the population model, and here you have the possibility to adjust the different concentration degrees on the first step, on the second step, and so on. So you can, and you see immediately what this would be. So you can control immediately in the interactive way the concentration and what is going on for this concentration. Here you have the detailed information. Well, you can afterwards have information of housing densities and also accessibilities. Have a little problem actually with accessibilities, but you have informations like that, and you can also have the numbers, the real numbers of the different accessibilities and of the evaluations of the satisfactions. Well, we want in the second time to include some environment indicators. We will also integrate the profitability of shops. This would be interesting, because you can say, well, this would be here good to have a baker shop, but now we will look if this baker shop can survive. So you look how many people live in their surroundings of this baker shop. And if you are a certain level, then you stop and say, yeah. But if you have, of course, 10 kilometers, this is not very interesting. So you can evaluate also the profitability of shops. Well, we can also think at different soil occupations, also on the industrial areas. This is the model exists, but is not implemented in the distance support system. Well, so it's the presentation.
Thank you, Pierre, for your really good presentation. And I don't know if there are any questions. Can you come here? So maybe it's better, because in this way it's possible that all audience can listen to you. Yes.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I work at Iowa State University and on the intersection of urban planning and GIS. By the way, I also work with Flavia and in Indiana. So, as we think about the future and thinking about modeling the future and scenarios, I really like the central place here, and the city of Vienna could be really very well modeled to the top of this theory. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts to share about evaluation or of impact, and how to measure the impact of something that we model. So, you know, what we find, for example, like we work in geodesign, designing the geospatial data and creating scenarios for the future, the big issue that we have is how geospatial data and geospatial models to evaluate the impact of something that we are suggesting. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I'm interested in your thoughts beyond the modeling that you presented. If you have any ideas and thoughts about how we could deal with, especially if we are thinking of modeling, climate change modeling, things like that, measuring of the impact is really important. I would appreciate your thoughts on that.
Thank you very much. Indeed, we had one project, but I did not present it, where we combined this model with a traffic simulator, which was also developed in our institute. And this was interesting because we compared different situations, and we saw that indeed you can also, of course, because you have the satisfaction. So we have the frequentation of different amenities. So we can indeed you can calculate the traffic flows which are generated by these needs, by the satisfaction needs. And we did it in one project with the ministry in Paris. And it was interesting because we saw indeed that if we have a fractal situation, you have more local people. Indeed, are more remain more in a local level. So you have more a reduction of the big distances. And this is a central place, of course, idea. But of course, it would be good to combine it by such an evaluation, for example, because then you have, if you have traffic estimation, you can of course have the CO2 evaluation.
Yeah, I'm thinking about models that are like short-term and long-term kind of impact and what are all the factors.
We can discuss
yes,
that.
yes.
Yeah.
And the other one I had was a question on optimization. So if there is we model a city, but is there like what you showed at the end, hiring, for example, and you can move things around. Of course, there is the sea, the ocean, but is there like how would you know what is an optimal model or version or an idea? So if you have any thoughts on optimization of the modeling.
We reflected about that at the beginning, and we had even not of this model, but a similar fractal model too. We have a simulator which is generated by evaluating some indicators generated in a still automatic logic, future development. But usually we did not do it because we say it is a decision support system, and so we give the information to the politicians and the planners, so they can look what is going on, how is the satisfaction, how it, and so on. For example, indeed, car use and so on, this would be interesting. And he decided afterwards, if the major has a friend and said, here we construct, it would be bad perhaps, but it's so. I will only say it's a decision support, but it will not, we won't substitute the planner by a computer program. They don't like it, by the way.
Now, there are other questions? Really, because, okay. Yeah.
Hello. Very interesting. I'm very glad about this presentation. I have been doing some modeling in Florida and Georgia in the US, and those are the things that are changing very rapidly, and especially very exploration and diversity. And I always am curious about, I have this question sometimes about how do you account sometimes in this almost for political diversity and social diversity, we get to be very quantitative, population numbers and all that. But how to get that for other factors that are very quantitative in nature, very reason,
Well, we have data about the fragmentation, the number of people which are fragmentating some different amenities. Whereas in France we have indeed, no, it's not official, it's our master plans, we used master plans. And we looked in master plans, what planners to use as indications. And it is rather interesting. You have, for example, some differences, of course, between very rural areas where the accepted distances are higher, of course. But globally, you have a coherence between different evaluations. And the fragmentation, yes, it also comes from empirical data. So we know how much people will go to the big forest or to the theater or something like that.
Good. Well, I work with an example in this type of geodescent projects, and we would love to propose your
Afterwards, all parameters can be changed.
Yeah.
Possibility to change it. They're indicated and you can change it. So in other countries, if the situation is different, or you have a very low dense area or something like that, you can change the parameters.
Yeah.
We have another short question.
My postgraduate research as one was dedicated to practical life. And what I try to understand now is what about the cultural aspect, social aspect, just to shift the
You see, the culture, indeed, we discussed a lot about that, because indeed we think that we come back to the theory of needs. Needs are very anthropological. For all people, you must have food, you must also have love, or you must have education, because people want to learn something. So this is general, but the situation, the concrete situation, cultural situation, can be of course different, and therefore we have here the list of the different types of. Find it now. Yes, you have here the list of the different types of amenities of services, and of course you can redefine completely this list. And you can if you have indications about the fragmentation of an amenity which does not exist in Europe, for example, well, you introduce it, no problem. It's possible to introduce other types and to modify this list.
So this is anyway
This is indeed calibrated with the French data, but it is of course possible to change completely the list. And for other cultural contexts, it is necessary, of course. All right.
Thank you so much. I think that now we can close the first keynote speech. Thank you so much, Pierre, and thank you so much to all people that make some questions. And I want to close with this present for all organization of THEMA.
Thank you very much.
We can go to the another session, but if you want to go on with the discussion with Professor Pierre Frankhauser, we can go with during the Metropolitan. Okay.
Obviously,
Okay.
it was understood, and the questions were interesting.
Fantastic. But also, thank you so much for the showing the
Because
case.
I agree. If I'm speaking English, it is sometimes
No, it was
everybody
so clear. And
okay.
thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for.
No, I'm sorry, but I was really. I don't know why. Because after 20 years of speaking in public.
How did you know my work at the beginning?
No, the presentation of you, because it was just a little.
No, but you say that since a long time you should.
Yeah, because I read many papers also with
Yeah.
Claudia. So.
Yeah.
it's like to see like the professor that you, I don't know, the professor. So, and after having met you, finally I saw that you are a human. And,
Yeah.
yes, but I don't know, but I'm really sorry for my really bad presentation. I was
No problem. It's all correct. No
Thank
problem.
you so much.
Thank you for, and well, we see later on.
The present is a thing from Anastasia, so
The present is from the Benakis Museum, and it's a picture. It's art from the Cloud Islands,
Yeah.
and it's a very old idea. It's interpreted for peace, for purity, for friendship, and so on.
Look.
So,
Look.
Chiara,
yes.
I think.
Oh, very fine.
See?
Very fine.
It's Anastasia.
It's